Before we look at more constructs, let's briefly talk about parameters, about metadata, and about how to load and save your work. So we were using one parameter in this last example, namely for the timeout of our when clause. So we called this parameter deadline, and then when we send it to simulator before the simulation starts, we have to pick a value for this deadline. Or rather, one is picked for us automatically 5 minutes in the future, but we could edit this. So timeouts are one place where you can use parameters. There's another one, namely values. So in this contract, there's one constant value, this 100 ADA here. Let me remove that and replace it with a parameterized value. I can give the parameter a name. Let's call it amount. And now if I send to simulator, I can again choose the deadline. And now I also can choose an amount. So if I choose 50 ADA, and instead of the former 100 ADA deposit, now the giver is supposed to make a 50 ADA deposit. If we do that as before, the receiver gets it. So those are the two places where you can use parameters, timeouts and values, constant values. If we go back to edit source, we see down here this metadata tab, and if we click on that, then we can edit the so-called metadata of the contract. So that's things like descriptions, names, help texts. In particular for the contract itself in the top portion, and then for the parties, the participants, and finally for the parameters. So for example, contract type other is fine. Contract name is Marlow Pioneer Program, simple payment, close. Giver makes payment to receiver. Do the same here, I suppose. We can describe the roles, and we can also describe our parameters. If we try this out now, we see that now our metadata is used here. So for example, here now we see this currency symbol ADA, and now instead of the 50 million, we can just type 50, and this is now correctly scaled to Loveless. Also, here we have these tooltips where we see our description of the parameters. Finally, what we can do is we can save the contract. And when we do that, the metadata that we just entered will be saved as well. So we can go to Save As and pick a name, press on Save. And I mean, as it usually works, once we have picked a name, if we press Save, then the previous saved data of code will be overwritten. So the way it works, it's not saved to your hard drive. Instead, it's saved as a GitHub gist. So in order for this to work when you do it the first time, you have to log into GitHub and grant the playground permission to create gists on your behalf. And similarly, you can always open existing ones. So if I do that, there's all sorts of gists that I did for previous events. And here are the 3 contracts that I saved that we saw in this lecture. So the simple payment one using the pay contract, then the simple payment one using a simple close, and finally the one where we replaced the 100 million Loveless with the parameter. Here I went to the corresponding GitHub gist page where this was saved. And we see that this gist actually contains 3 files. The first one is called metadata.json, and as the name suggests, it contains the metadata that we just entered. Then playground.marlow, which is the actual Marlow contract. And finally, something called playground.malo.json, where I'm not really sure what that is for, and it's just an empty JSON object. We will leave the links to all the gists of the example contracts I show you in Canvas. And what you can do is go to that link so you end on this page, and then you can click fork. This is now not visible because it's my own gist, but you will see a fork button, and if you press that, then this gist will be forked to your own GitHub gist. And then it will be available to open when you are in the playground. So that's an easy way for you to get this example code and also to share with others.